Trash talk is making news in Miami. From the Dodge Sports Desk, I'm Mike Sherman, and this is the Bedlam Nation Conversation, BCS edition. I'm here with OU beat writer John Helsley, OSU beat writer Scott Wright. And Scott, John, let me ask you this. The press conferences were yesterday, and I guess it's time for talk, and the talk has been of the trash element here. From OU and OSU, what do you make of it, John?
Well, I mean, this has actually been going on for a couple of weeks. You know, initially we heard the talk of Tebow saying he couldn't wait to go against the Big 12 defense. You know, I'd read some comments about Charlie Strong, their defensive coordinator. He was asked, could Oklahoma do what they've done point-wise in the SEC? And he said, no, we play better defense in the SEC. So there's kind of been some, you know, some rumblings of this. And, of course, Dom Franks piped up and said Tim Tebow ranked about fourth in the Big 12 quarterback hierarchy. So not good stuff. I don't know what to make of it. I think these two teams are maybe trying to drum up some hatred for each other. I don't know that it exists, but in games like this, I think teams like to dislike each other.
Does it matter in a game like this? Does this kind of thing translate into some sort of action, motivation, et cetera on the field, Scott?
You know, people always make a big deal about it being a motivational factor. It's the national title game. You don't need any extra motivation. Where I think that this kind of stuff has an impact is that people remember who said what before the game, and when you get on the field, somebody says something else back to that guy, and maybe it gets some things going, gets emotions kind of riled up a little bit. And then I think it has an impact because you don't know who's going to be able to handle that emotion in a good way, who's going to be able to brush it off and count it as just regular trash talk, and who it's going to get in their head and have some impact on the way that they play. Now, you know, there was a lot before the 2005 Orange Bowl with USC with Larry Birdine talking about 1.5-man team and all of that stuff, and I don't really know that was the reason that that Oklahoma was just flat and USC had this great game that day, but I think that it got in some of the people's heads whenever they got on the field and were getting knocked around a little bit and the trash talk heated up.
Do you think in any way that teams look at a couple of these guys who may be talking a little excessively in these press conferences, get in the game plan and say, this guy's going to be a little bit overheated, so let's run a play at him, or let's offer him the opportunity to overextend himself, maybe over pursue on a defensive player, maybe come across the middle as an offensive player, and really try to put them in a position where they can expose them. Anything like that ever happen, John?
I'm sure it does, and that could be the case. And the other danger in this, guys, is if you are one of those guys who have been outspoken and maybe you get off to a rough start, maybe that starts playing in your mind as well. You know, how I did all this talking now, that can maybe really have a negative impact on you.
Go ahead, Scott.
Well, if I'm Tim Tebow and I look out there and I see Dom Franks in one-on-one coverage with Percy Harvin or one of my other speedsters, a double move and try to burn him deep early, and you're going to be in his head the rest of the night.
Isn't it more likely, though, you think that whatever the result becomes, whether it's a Florida loss in which maybe OU's defense does end up, being a lot better than anybody, including some of us think, or an OU loss in which Florida exposed it, maybe then people go back and extrapolate and say, oh, that's why they lost, and that was a factor. In other words, it becomes a convenient excuse.
Yeah, the hindsight is always easy. And, there's still people who remember Larry Birdine and his comments. They came up very quickly this week when we started hearing some of this. So, absolutely, it's much easier to look backward.
Isn't it worse, though, as you say that, I almost think when these trash talk comes up in national championship games between now and forever, people in Oklahoma are going to remember Larry Birdine, not for what he did on the field, but what he did with the microphones in front of him.
Yeah, and the same with Dan Cody at the end of that game, apparently saying just get this thing over with or whatever he allegedly said. Yeah. So I mean that stuff kind of always gets tied to it whenever it's a big game like that.
Okay, guys, we're going to take a break. On the other side, we're going to come back and talk about what's going on in Stillwater with the Oklahoma State football coaching staff. We're back on the Bedlam Nation Conversation for the Dodge Sports Desk. I'm Mike Sherman here with OU beat writer John Helsley, OSU beat writer Scott Wright. Scott, let's talk about the Cowboys and the coaching carousel, specifically on the Cowboys coaching staff. What's the latest on the Cowboys coaches?
At this point, the carousel is picking up but not dropping off. That's the big problem. If you bring it all in, a grad assistant, director of operations, a defensive coordinator, and 2 offensive assistants, Mike Gundy's got five open spots to fill in his entire staff. 3 of those are really impactful right now. Trooper Taylor, Curtis Looper, and Tim Beckman all being gone. Those are 3 guys that would be on the road recruiting this week. And you're less than a month from signing day, so it's really important that you cover all your bases with that. I heard from somebody that Mike Gundy was on his way to Atlanta this morning, so we'll see. I'm guessing picking up a lot of recruits out there and trying to make as many in-home visits as he can to assure everybody that there's no issues going on, nothing to worry about. We're still business as usual in Stillwater, but he's also having to try to find some coaches. To get guys in here. Most importantly, a defensive coordinator at this point.
John, you covered Oklahoma State for a lot of years. What do you make of this many openings at this time of year for the Cowboys?
You get to the point where you lose a coach here or there, and that's a good sign for your program in some respects. But boy, you don't want to lose this many, and especially at this juncture with recruiting coming up. Guys jump off the bandwagon real easy these days. We see. Remember last year there were a lot of recruits that backed out on signing day. So I think you have to get in there if that's indeed what Coach Gundy's doing, and lock those down the best you can. The other thing I think maybe bears some watching here is, for a long time OSU was known as a school that would pay its assistants well, and they do pay them pretty well. But a lot of other schools have caught them and even passed them. And let's face it, Boone Pickens' fund is down right now, and so it'll be interesting to see if they can keep pace now. And this assistant coach, paying craziness that's going on around the country.
And it was interesting because when Oklahoma State made this move, they were ahead of everyone else, but it wasn't just dramatic, big checks that they were writing. The SEC is really throwing around some money for some coordinators right now. A lot of reports are saying that Curtis Looper is almost doubling his salary to go and hold what's essentially the same position at Auburn. Not a coordinator, an assistant head coach type of position, running backs coach. So it's there's a lot of money going around for assistants these days in the SEC.
So money is one factor. The OSU no longer has that competitive advantage. But how much is the responsibility and the label of coordinator really impacting all this movement within the Oklahoma State coaching ranks?
I think that certainly has something to do with it. It's easy to look at this and say, well, these guys were taking a shot at the big money. That's a little bit short-sighted if you look at it just that way. I think that when you look at all the different roles, all the different titles on Oklahoma State's offensive coaching staff. You've got different guys that are the coordinator of this, the coordinator of that, the run game, the pass game. They're the co-coordinators of the offense, and Mike Gundy is really the guy that's running the show. You got coaches want to be respected for what they're doing, and around the coaching world right now, it's known that Gundy is the guy running the show, and so these guys want to go somewhere else where they have an opportunity to make some advances in their career. For the most part, these guys want to be head coaches eventually. Curtis Looper certainly does, and had a couple of opportunities earlier this year. These guys want to advance their career to that point, and right now they're seeing kind of a logjam ahead of them, and think that maybe they have a better chance for advancement somewhere else.
Last question on the OSU coaching situation. OSU loses 2 of its 3 minority coaches at a time when there's a spotlight nationally on the lack of minority head football coaches in college football. What does that mean to the Cowboys? And and to Gundy's credit, a lot of good hires. He brought them there. A lot of good hires at defensive coordinator, offensive coordinator, guys that went off and got their own jobs. But the absence or the reduction of minority coaches really has to hit them.
Yeah, it really does. You mentioned the national spotlight. Regardless of what kind of national spotlight is on the idea of getting minority coaches into bigger positions, it's important for Oklahoma State regardless of all of that, because it's an important recruiting tool. Guys who have been through similar situations as high school players, who are maybe coming up in inner cities or small towns, that have been, when they relate better to coaches who have been through things that they've been through, and it's not necessarily a racial thing, but black players tend to relate better to other black coaches. So it's an important thing to have a couple of those guys on staff who are talented coaches as well. Because if you're just there to recruit and you're not going to be coaching, it's not going to help the team in the long run. But Gundy has been good at targeting the type of talent he wants on his coaching staff, and so you have to feel pretty confident in his ability to find some guys.
His track record as a hirer also speaks largely for him. Vance Bedford, defensive coordinator, minority coach, as we said, Trooper Taylor, a very, very well thought of recruiter, and really an energetic guy. Curtis Looper, a guy who's been with the OSU program for quite a while. It'll be interesting to see how Gundy builds on and replaces. That's a factor of success too, isn't it, Scott? I mean, basically, when you have success, people start looking at your people and hiring them away.
Yeah, that's how it goes, and Gundy has made the point of saying that we don't want to lose guys unless you're going somewhere to be coordinators or head coaches. That's what happened with Tim Beckman. That's the reputation you want to build for your assistants, is that they can come here, be a coach for you, and there's something better on the other side. That's really the world of assistant coaches. There's not that many assistant coaches that go somewhere to stay there and just wait for the head coaching job to open up. A lot of guys are looking for something to advance their career, and it's probably going to be somewhere else that they do it. So if they can come in and help you for a few years, it's all the better to bring them in.
Okay, guys, we'll take a break and we'll come back on the other side with our predictions on the BCS championship game.
My all-new Dodge Journey took me from a 400-square-foot studio apartment.
Call Mario. Hello? Yo, man, I'm on my way.
To a new crib downtown.
Play memo.
Staff meeting 9:30.
Now this house is mine. The higher you go, the sweeter the journey. Introducing the crossover that's ready for anything. The all-new Dodge Journey. If you can dream it, do it.
We're back on the Bedlam Nation conversation with picks for the BCS championship game. Scott Wright, you first.
Well, when we made our predictions in the paper, I went with the Sooners by a field goal. I'm not saying literally a field goal, but by 3 points. 34-31 is the score that I've said. So that's what I'll stick with. I think the Sooners can pull this one out.
And by a field goal, you don't necessarily mean that they will kick a field goal, do you?
No, not necessarily. I think that if you get in a position where you're having to have a field goal from Jimmy Stevens to win the game, you got to be a little bit shaky about that if you're a Sooner fan.
A high-scoring game, Scott's picking. How about you, John?
I'm going to go even a little higher. I went with Florida in my pick in the paper. I'm going to stick with the Gators, something like 38-34. I think it's going to be a very offensive game. I'm like a lot of people. I'm not sure about Big 12 defenses, so we're going to see. Can Florida stop Oklahoma? I don't think so, but I think that they're going to score enough points to win it.
Okay, guys, that's all for the Bedlam Nation conversation. Stay with the best coverage team anywhere, every day at newsok.com and every morning in the New Look, Oklahoma.